Today on the very first episode of the show, we're talking about whether subscriptions are the future of gaming, the wave of games that have come out from the Pokémon 30th anniversary celebration, plus why AAA gaming may be reaching a breaking point. Let's go. The Game Adventure Podcast is a weekly, family-friendly show keeping you up to date on all the latest news in video games. We'll also mix in a heavy dose of nostalgia with retro games and even things like how the worlds of tech and culture and even faith interact with video games as an art form. We're doing it all in less than an hour every Saturday morning, so let's get started. It is Saturday, March 7th, and welcome to the first episode of the show. My name is Dan, and I have thought about doing this for a long time, but only recently decided that the best time to start is probably now. I wanted to start this episode by just kind of telling you a little bit about myself and why I decided to start this show. So I've been a fan of video games since the first time I played a Sonic the Hedgehog game on a Sega Genesis in a Christian bookstore, probably sometime in the early 90s. I was maybe 7 or 8. Ironically, my parents didn't even let us have video games when I was a kid, which of course made them all the more interesting to me. And so by the time I was about 14, I had smuggled a Game Boy Original into my room. I had biked 20 miles to an EB Games, if you remember those, to buy a used N64. And I was buying PC Gamer magazines at the grocery store whenever I could, even though I didn't have a PC that could even run these games. So there was always something really that I loved about these beautifully crafted worlds that were filled with these places to explore and music to listen to. And it was like an art form that you experienced. And if you fast forward a bunch of years, I'm now a father with young kids. I run my own business, providing like freelance design services of various types. I'm an artist, a musician, and a pastor of a small church. So life is really full. But one of the few hobbies that I've continued to do for really only fun is video games. And it's usually an hour here and there playing with my kids. It's something I love sharing with them. But one thing that I've really struggled with is keeping up to date on everything going on in the gaming world. I love podcasts, but I've had a really hard time finding one that kind of fit what I was looking for. Let me explain. I didn't have time to listen to multiple podcasts every week about multiple systems or to really spend like 2 to 3 hours on some of the long form ones out there. I also found out that many of the podcasts out there are by industry experts from like Silicon Valley, which has a place, who are, helpful to hear from at times, but kind of often a little out there and a little out of touch with like Midwest guys like me, particularly dads with kids. And the other challenge that I found was that I really wanted to find a podcast that I could listen to with my kids in the car, and even that they might want to listen to. And so I decided I can't be the only one who is looking for something like this. And while I've had a YouTube channel that I've posted a little gaming content on over the years, I thought it was time to launch an audio podcast through the same channel and just see who I could serve by doing that. So if you're listening to this and that maybe kind of describes you, then you're exactly who I'm trying to serve. So here's what you can expect. I am aiming to put out an episode as close to weekly as I can manage, and they will always be under an hour, and hopefully it will serve you well by keeping you up to date, maybe giving you something to think about, maybe something to pester your spouse with, like all the ways the next Zelda game is going to be epic. I know my wife loves like chats on topics like that, and by love, I mean she lovingly tolerates them. But hopefully we can also manage to find some more time to do the things that matter, like taking your kids to soccer practice or ballet lessons, and maybe even play some video games in your spare time. Who knows? So with that kind of introduction to this new endeavor that I'm on here, let's go ahead and get started. And every episode is going to follow kind of a similar format. We'll spend a little time looking at industry headlines. We will talk a little bit about like hardware and tech related stuff. And then more than just news, I want to bring like a point of view type topic, the kinds of things that I think about as I'm listening to the news. And then we'll also look at some retro video games and some of the news around those, the game list of kind of things that are coming out soon or things that I'm currently playing. And then maybe hopefully having some time for listener questions at the end, both questions that I have for you and maybe answering some questions of yours as we kind of build this community around a shared love of video games, but also love of other things, right? We want to have a life that's balanced. So this is our chance. This is our hour every week to just think about video games for a little bit and have some fun. So I'm really looking forward to it. So with that, let's go ahead and dig into this week's headlines in the news. So one of the bigger headlines that's kind of run through the last couple of weeks is the rising cost of hardware. And there's a couple of reasons for that. There's memory and storage prices that have really surged in 2025 and early 2026 that have led to like super razor thin margins for companies like Sony and Nintendo. And platform holders are basically reevaluating pricing for consoles. We've seen this for a couple of consoles and services that they're trying to compensate for these rising costs. And so when we're looking at like the PlayStation, for example, the next PlayStation has been now probably pushed out to 2027, maybe even 2028. A couple of various console makers they're trying to figure out how do we price this at a price that's actually affordable when we can barely afford to get the memory to actually make this thing in the first place. And the same kinds of issues have been happening with like graphics cards manufacturers. A lot of that driven, frankly, by AI, who is really, as an industry, eating up all of the resources when it comes to the types of things consumer electronics use. So I think something I've been kind of thinking about is as these console manufacturers are talking about, oh, what would it look like if the next PlayStation is like $900? Or like, would we really buy a $1,000 Xbox? And it's a good question. But honestly, I feel like we've been doing this for years already with our phones. So most of us have if we have an iPhone, you have a probably $1,000 phone, or it was $1,000 at one point in your pocket already. And you probably didn't buy it outright. If you're like most Americans, you probably bought this either on a plan that you pay monthly and it just kind of comes out of your bill every month, or you bought it on like an installment payment plan. So that's already been the norm with cell phones for consumer electronics. And Xbox has kind of gotten in on this with the Xbox All Access. They have a console bundle with Game Pass for a monthly rate that they're already doing. And so, I mean, if consoles are already going to cost $600 to $700 and you're already offering subscriptions, I don't know, maybe that's an option for us to kind of treat it like a manageable utility bill. I know that's what we do at our house, where we have like a installment plan for, I forget what it's called, but it's like a budget plan where it keeps your bill pretty much the same every month by spreading things out over the course of your averages for the year. So I don't know, maybe that's an option that more people will look into. I know I certainly would. I'm not going to be dropping $1,000 on the next Xbox. We'll talk about that in a minute. But I mean, I might be willing to spend, let's say, $50 a month to have access to some of their services and have the actual console that I've paid for. I think that's maybe a reasonable type of thing, a solution to a problem that we're certainly going to be seeing with rising console prices. The next thing is the Stop Killing Games initiative has been something that's been in the news quite a bit. And the basic context for this is they're trying to make a legal push to ensure that games remain playable after servers shut down. So we've seen a lot of this happening with the servers being shut down for older games, but even seen some of this with newer games that came out and were pushed out and people didn't sign up and join in the numbers that they thought they would. And so then they just 2 months later, 3 months later, will shut the whole thing down. And so this Stop Killing Games initiative is basically saying, hey, we would like the games to be available for perpetuity. So like continue to be able to play these games. And here's the thing. from my understanding at least, is that these games are a service. Whether you like that or not, that is what the companies are selling to you now. And maybe they've been kind of secretive about it. There's something to be said for how straightforward they should be. Like when I buy a game from Nintendo, I'm not actually buying that software anymore. I'm buying the right to play that software. And that, to be honest, does kind of give me an icky feeling. Like, I don't love that, but it's the way that it is right now. And it's what they're selling. And if we want to buy that, then that's how it is. So we're buying the right to play that game for a period of time. But maybe, while we can't force them to provide this service, it would be great if they would give us some LAN options or private server tools, so that my digital library doesn't become a graveyard just because the game didn't do as well as they thought that it was going to do. Does that make sense? Am I crazy on this? I feel like there's got to be some type of in-between here where we can continue to play games that maybe didn't do as well as they thought they would do. Or maybe games that, some of my favorite games personally are probably at least 10 years old, and I still go back and play those games. So for some of these games, it might make sense to at least offer some sort of option, even if it was something I had to pay for. I would pay a couple bucks a month to have a game that I really love continue to be available for me to play. Anyway, so that's kind of the big headlines, the things that were at the top of the news over the last week or so. There's been other stuff with AI, really been in the center of the news with AI eating up so many resources, particularly in the consumer electronics area. So I think we should probably expect to see those prices continue to go up. And I'm choosing to take the perspective that it is what it is, and I get to choose where I spend my money. And hopefully that sends a message. The consumer is able to send a message as far as like influencing where the price point should be for these hardware and services that are coming down the line over the next couple of years. So that's my take on that. With that, let's jump into some more like hardware and tech related news. All right, so the first thing on the list was just announced, I want to say yesterday or the day before, these announcements about Xbox Project Helix, which is the next generation Xbox that we now know runs in a Windows environment. So this is exciting. A lot of people were kind of anticipating that this would be the move that Microsoft makes. There's been kind of both sides of this. People saying, I think this is going to turn off Xbox gamers because they just want a console. And I tend to think that this was the right move because it's basically a PC in a box. And if you remember back a couple months ago when Steam announced the Steam box, or Valve announced the Steam box, and people got really excited about this, where, hey, I can have an actual computer that is built for the living room, but I could use for other things as well. I think people got really excited about that. And so this is very similar to that, where we have a PC in a box that is set up exactly for the living room. And honestly, if I can work and play at the same desk on one machine, I might actually be willing to justify a higher cost, which we've already said is probably likely. If I can use it for work and I can also use it for play. I already play and work at my same desk. Like my Switch 2 and my Xbox are sitting at my work desk, and I'll just flip in between them after I'm done with work at night when I come back down to my office, to my studio, and I start to play games on the same screens that I was working on during the day. So I don't think this is nearly as far-fetched as kind of some people have made it out to be. As far as pushing the console gamer away by adding complexity, I don't know that that's really the case, because most people who are really into a console like Xbox are already dealing with changing some of the settings because you've already got an environment with the Series X and the Series S. So adding a machine that is going to do that, but with a lot more graphics settings, I think that's not necessarily a bad thing. And maybe this creates a situation where they can even have multiple tiers or price points for that new system, so that everybody can be able to play the same way that PC has done such a great job scaling the games over the course of the last, couple decades, where I can play the same game that my friend is playing, but he's playing on much higher settings and it looks much better on his, but we can still both have access to the same game. That's a definite benefit of being a PC gamer. So if they can add the already knowledge base that they have around Xbox and how to make that really run smoothly, I think this will be a really good thing. I look forward to hearing more about it. I've always been an Xbox guy, and so this actually makes me excited that I might be able to convince my wife to let me get the next Xbox if it's also a computer that I can use for work. I don't know, but I think it could be cool. All right, moving from Microsoft to Sony a little bit here, let's talk about the PS5 Pro, PSSR2, and Pico upscaler. So what this is allowing game makers to do, specifically with titles like Resident Evil 9, is to provide incredible image stability, but doing it through the software side instead of needing really, really ramped up hardware to deliver the same or similar results, at least, which is really cool because one of the problems we're running into with hardware, as I understand it, is that it's getting more and more expensive to manufacture better hardware. And if we can use existing tech on the software side to make games look really good without requiring us to buy a new, $2,000+ PC every year or two, that I'm all for it. I think that's a really cool solution for a problem that is probably not going to get any better over the course of the next couple of years. There is something to be said for the programs that are using AI to upscale versus using people and teams to upscale. So there was a very large studio that was shut down a couple weeks back that was really good at remakes. And some of the chatter in the industry was that the reason that these studios are being shut down and done away with by big companies like Sony is because they think they're going to replace their work with AI tools. And that is sad for sure. I definitely have strong feelings about AI being used when it comes to art and music because, again, like I said at the beginning of this episode, one of the things I love the most about video games is it's an experience of a kind of art form where I get to walk in worlds that somebody else has crafted and they've decided what the lighting is going to look like, and they've painted character models and they've created this world that lived in somebody else's mind. And I can see the use for AI when it comes to making my dream look better and more, closer to what I wanted it to look like as a game developer. But I think we need to be really careful about keeping artists and storytellers and human beings at the center of this industry, because what we're creating is for human beings. And one of the best parts of gaming is that it actually allows us to connect with each other. And I think we have to be really careful about letting AI take a portion of that's going to turn this into less of an art form and more of a disposable kind of thing. So that kind of leads me into my first topic that I want to introduce. And the question I have is this: has AAA gaming kind of reached a natural complexity ceiling, a point of severely reduced returns when it comes to the amount of time and complexity that we are introducing into everything from the game itself to the graphics to the size of the world? Have we gone too big? Have we actually reached farther than what we can actually accomplish with the technology that exists today? So a couple of parts to this, things that we've all noticed. First of all, the length of time that it takes to make a game has increased exponentially over the last decade. We've gone from game cycles being a couple of years to being 10-year development cycles. And that itself is having a couple of impacts that I see on the gaming industry. One is that there's so long in between games that you actually lose the generation of players that were invested in your IP in the first place. So one thing that they're noticing in Japan is that we have a whole generation of kids who aren't interested in some of the legacy IPs in Japanese games because they've made the next game so graphically superior and so expensive, and it's taking so long to make it that by the time they get it made, the kids who were, 9, 10, 11 are now in their 20s, and they're not connecting to that game the same way that they would have even 4 or 5 years after the original came out or the last entry in the series. So that's kind of one part of it. The next part, though, is the amount of cost that it takes. So we are investing so much money in some of these games. We're talking to the tune of hundreds of millions of dollars being sunk into this game that in some cases, the response to the release of the game has to be so good that there's no way that they're going to make back that amount of money. So yeah, you may have achieved some of the best graphics that anybody has ever seen, and realism and interconnectivity and even the size of the world. Some of the size of the game world in some of these games is so enormous that there's no way one person is going to, or at least the average person, I guess I should say, people like me, people who are playing this for fun, want to experience the game. How do I even begin to experience a game that's going to take me 200 hours to even see the majority of the map? We've made it so big. And while, yes, it's very impressive, and the graphics are unreal, it's unbelievable, and the complexity of even the character interactions is just crazy. I just wonder if we've maybe overreached in complexity and we've stopped focusing on the things that actually matter the most, which in my opinion would be the story. Is it fun? Is it telling a story that's worth telling? And I'm not saying we shouldn't invest a lot of time and talent and money into creating fantastic games. Some of my favorite games are Nintendo IPs that they have just polished until it's shown. Breath of the Wild, I just finished playing through again on the Switch 2. And I can't believe how good that game still is because they didn't lose sight of trying to make the graphics the most realistic they possibly could. There is an edge to the world. It's still enormous. You can still spend hundreds of hours exploring, and there's still plenty to do and explore, but there is a limit to it, and that's okay. And, I think that's kind of an interesting idea to me, that maybe we've put too much emphasis on making it as big and grand and outlandish as possible. And we need to kind of start refocusing on the basics, the important things. The same thing actually happened with computer generated graphics. So if you go back to like the early 2000s, the CGI in movies was amazing. Like with the tech that they had available to them, it still looks incredible today. But as time went on, the demand for CGI, and part of this is the audience that did this, started to demand more and more CGI in their films, and the budgets for these films got even bigger and bigger. And so the studios who were actually doing the CGI work had to go in and bid lower and lower to get in under the budget of these movies. And so what ended up happening was, yeah, we got a lot of CGI, but it's a lot of subpar CGI. And a lot of it is at the cost of a story that sometimes doesn't even make sense anymore. Marvel. I just think there's something to be said for let's go back to the basics a little bit and let's still make some great games. And that's okay. So that's my thought on it. I would love to hear your thoughts on it. What are some of the games that you've seen that, yeah, it looks like they overreached on this? What are some of your favorite simple games that really drive home that idea that simplicity is okay and sometimes that actually makes the game better? I'd love to hear from you. Let me know your thoughts. You can email me at thisisthegameadventure@gmail.com. Let me know what you think. With that, let's turn from the newest games and the biggest games back to the retro rewind. I love new games, but I also really love old games. I love the sense of nostalgia, the basic way that they created something with the technology that was available at the time. I love the way that old video games can take you right back to where you were when they first came out. So let's talk about some of the things happening in the retro space. And I think we can't really talk about retro without talking about Pokemon this week, with Pokemon FireRed and LeafGreen showing up on Switch finally. This happened, I guess, late in the week last week, but I still want to talk about it. They dropped on the 27th of February on the eShop for $20 each. And these are 2004 Game Boy Advance remakes of the original Kanto Journey. And there's been kind of a split thoughts on this, I guess. Some people are really excited about it, and some people are not as excited. They would have preferred red, blue, and yellow. Which Nintendo actually did on the DS years ago. But this is the first time that we've had these exact games available to us, available to play in a long time. And then they did this thing where they charged $20 for each of them, which $20 is not a huge amount of money, but it's not nothing either. And it's definitely not the included in the subscription for the Nintendo subscription to games. So, like, what do we make of that? So here's my thoughts on it are kind of mixed as well. When it comes to having these games available again, I couldn't be more thrilled. I think this is awesome. I think Nintendo should have done this a long time ago. Making these older games available on the Switch is the right move. And as far as the price is concerned, I'm actually okay with them charging $20 for them instead of, if that means that I can have them separate from the subscription, because we've already seen some games get put on the subscription service and then taken off again, the same way that shows do on every subscription that you can do, Netflix, Peacock, whatever your preferred streaming platform is. So that's fine, but I want to always have access to this. And so I actually kind of like the idea that it's mine no matter what happens with the subscription. If I decide to not subscribe to that anymore, I still have access to these games. So they're treating them more like a digital game. Now, from what I've seen, they are not much different at all. This is not a remake. This is just a port over so that I can play it. It's really no different from emulation. We'll have to talk about emulation at a later date because that's a bigger topic. But this is, I think, a really good thing. And some of the cool things that I've seen are the ability to trade locally. So I can actually trade with my kids who have Switches, and I can use my Switch too, and we can trade Pokemon between us. That's really difficult to do with emulation. And then also, I really love some of the things I've seen with the game chat coming up. So on the Switch 2 in particular, you can use game chat to share your screen with other people as you're playing. And so I've seen pictures of people playing where they're playing the, games that they love. They're playing FireRed on their Switch, and they've got 3 other friends who are playing their Pokemon games, and they're all kind of like watching what each other are doing while they're playing. I think that's cool. It almost takes me back to like when you'd sit around in a circle with friends with Game Boys, and you'd all be playing Pokemon and you'd be talking about what you want to trade, and somebody would pull out a link cable, and when it gets dark, you pull out your worm lights, and the nostalgia hits me hard. So I really am excited about this, and I think $20 is not such a bad thing if it lets me play this game and experience it with my kids in a way that lets us play together. The next thing on this like retro section I wanted to talk about is the Virtual Boy. So while I love the idea of playing FireRed and LeafGreen on my Switch, those Game Boy games still look really good, especially if you love the pixel art style. The Virtual Boy, on the other hand, I have different feelings about. So I never owned a Virtual Boy. And basically, Nintendo has brought some of these games from the Virtual Boy over to the Nintendo Switch Online subscription service. So you can play these original games. And they've also made this like really cool, original looking plastic. It's basically a device that looks like the Virtual Boy. You can slide your Switch into it, and I've even been told it smells exactly like the original, which is a weird thing to say, but it's nostalgia. So yes, it smells like it did back in the day. I never had one, so I don't have anything to say about the smell. But I don't think it's weird. I think that's part of remembering what it felt like back then. What I don't get, though, is why you would keep the red and black look. I understand for keeping it like original to how the game looked and felt. But let's be real. Most of the people that I've talked to that have actually owned or played the Virtual Boy said it was a really terrible experience. Yeah, it was nostalgic. It was part of their childhood. But at the end of the day, you didn't feel real good after using it. It gave you a lot of eye strain. My friend told me that he got headaches when he would play it, but the game was fun, and so he would still play it. Like, that's not a good thing. So why not give us the games, but remastered? And I'm not saying you need to upgrade the graphics. I'm saying, why not make it in black and white so that it still looks okay, or in a color mode so that we can actually play them? Maybe that's something that they'll bring down the road. But I think there is kind of a line with this retro stuff where, yeah, we want to experience it like it was. And there's a lot that was good and that is worthy of celebrating in those things. But some of it we've improved a lot on over the last couple of years, the last couple of decades in my case. And so why not bring some of those improvements with the game so that we can actually enjoy it in the way that the developers really wanted it to be, but in a modern kind of way. And really, there's another thing called the Pokemon Game Boy Music Player that is kind of a cool nostalgic toy. It kind of fits in that same category as the Virtual Boy accessory for me. It's basically a little music player that looks like a Game Boy, and you can pop cartridges in, and it will play basically a couple minute long song from the game. And it's a cool, like I said, nostalgic toy, but honestly, it just kind of lacks practical value. It's not cheap. I want to say it's like $70. And so that's awfully expensive for something that's really, if we're being real, it's going to sit on my desk or on my shelf for a while. And I'm not going to use it. Like, why not make it a Bluetooth speaker? I don't think that really kills the nostalgia coolness factor. I think it allows you to take that factor and actually bring it into something that you would use in the modern day. So that's my thoughts on that. And that's pretty much wraps up the Retro Rewind section. If you've got ideas on things that we could talk about with old games in particular, or old games that have been made new, what's your favorite remaster? What was your favorite game as a kid? I'd love to hear from you. And with that, let's dive into the game list. This is kind of a chance to do our very best to keep up with the games that have come out recently that we might want to play, or games that are coming out soon, things that are on the horizon. So let's dig right in with Mario Tennis Fever. This Mario Tennis game has chaos basically built into the game. It's got 38 characters, and then add on top of that, it features these like fever rackets that have flame, ice, or mud that trigger powers when the ball hits the ground. And what I'm understanding about it so far, I watched the trailer a couple weeks back, is that it has this like old school, almost like GameCube type of feeling, like kind of wacky, over the top, perfect for 4-player couch co-op. But it also seems like it might be so crazy that it kind of gets out of hand. What I've also heard about the adventure mode from most folks is that it's just kind of like a tutorial that teaches you how to play the game, which is all right. But if you remember back to like some of the Mario Golf games, had some really fun like adventure modes built in where you had to make your way from course to course. There was a lot of potential for that in this game. I don't think that they built out the game that way though. So I think this actual Mario Tennis game is more like Mario Kart, where the multiplayer is absolutely pure chaos. And the fever shots, if you want it to be crazy, is great. But if you wanted to play strategically and you took yourself very seriously, if you consider yourself a Mario Tennis pro, we need to talk about other life dreams for you, but this might not be the game for you. So it's kind of the fever shots turn things into kind of just a complete mess where it just gets crazy. So I'm thinking this might be a good game to play if you have kids that just want to have fun. But when I see the multiplayer in particular, it starts to feel a lot more like kind of the way Mario Party went, where the specific games that were the mini games with no skill involved necessarily, they were just total chaos. And sometimes that's fun. And so if you're getting into this game to have fun with your kids and you just want chaos and you want to poke fun at each other, this might be a great game for you to play with your family. If you're getting it for a really good solo adventure to become a tennis pro with Mario, you might not want to spend the $70 to get this particular game. Pokémon Pokopia. Pokopia? Am I saying that right? Pokémon Pokopia is a sim game, kind of, where you play as Ditto, trying to restore the world by building habitats that attract Pokemon. So this game has actually been really well received. It is like a 9 out of 10 rating in like even the meta level reviews. So what I'm hearing so far really intrigues me about this game. It is definitely not a mainline Pokemon game, and we'll talk about those in just a second. But it's basically a combination of like Minecraft, where you're making the world, some like Animal Crossing elements built in, some Viva Pinata elements. If you remember that game, I adored Minecraft and Viva Pinata, and I've sunk more hours than I care to admit into both of those games. So what I love about this game is that it's an original idea. And I hope that this really does well and helps studios like Game Freak to continue kind of testing the envelope with what they can do with Pokemon. Don't get me wrong, I love the original Pokemon formula. But to be real, we've got a lot of those games already. So I would love to see the world of Pokemon continue to expand. And if this game does well, and I think it will, it might give studios like Game Freak the license to say, hey, let's try out another crazy idea. And sometimes that means the game fails. And sometimes the idea is just bad. But I would rather have studios be supported in making those like creative leaps, because sometimes they're going to stumble onto something that is really unique, as this game seems to be. So one kind of like caveat is that there seems to be kind of a darker undertone to the storyline of this game. Some people have even called it like a post-apocalyptic Pokemon game, which if you think back to the storyline of a lot of Pokemon games, they're often playing with either end of the world or like changing the nature of reality kind of things. Team Galactic has got into some pretty wild stunts over the course of the Pokemon games. And some of those even mess around with like changing the nature of reality. And so it seems like this game finally has gone past that and taken us to a world that has been totally changed by something, which, given the current news cycle, kind of makes you think. But it's a nice escape for sure from talking about world politics and looking at the state of the world and focusing on making a garden and watering it like Squirtle and attracting brand new Pokemon. So I'm excited. I think my kids are going to love this game, and I actually think I'm going to get it, and we'll see how that goes. I'll let you know when I get a chance to play it. The final game on our game list for this week, well, I've got two more. Pokemon Wind and Waves. Winds and Waves. This is the next mainline entry. And I got to say, I'm so glad that they said 2027 to give us a little bit of space in between this last Pokemon game and some of the old ones being re-released and then these new ones coming out next year. It also gives them enough time to make sure that this one is better. And from what I've seen of it, it definitely looks better than Scarlet and Violet. But again, that's not really saying very much. And I'm not saying Scarlet and Violet were like the worst games ever. I enjoyed them. My kids thought they were fun. But I don't know that I'd be jumping to get another game that looked and played like Scarlet and Violet. This one looks like the graphics are definitely leaps and bounds above where it was. The lighting looks much better. The water looks fantastic. If you really can go underwater, that's going to be very exciting. And honestly, it just feels more full. It seems like there's more things going on in the world than there was in those last generation of games. So I'm looking forward to this one. As far as which starter I'm going to choose, I usually choose Fire. So it looks like Pombon and I are going to be good friends. And I'm sure my daughter will want a plush Pombon, which doubtless was Nintendo's plan when they designed these starters. The last game that I want to kind of list is Resident Evil 9 Requiem. So this isn't typically a game that I would play, mostly because I don't love horror games. That's not my thing. That's not when I kind of think about what games I want to spend time in. I ask the question, is this a world that I want to spend time in? And that's not necessarily like, is this a nice, happy-go-lucky game? It's, is this a world that I want to spend time in trying to redeem it, being the hero, exploring? Is there beauty to be found there? And I think a lot of that comes from my Christian faith. But this game in particular, I've played Resident Evil games in the past, and I've never really gotten a lot of joy out of them other than being terrified because they are really good at being scary. But they're not one that I love. And to kind of add to that, now that I've got kids, it's not a game that I can play with them. And this game in particular has pushed the gore and violence to the absolute limit of an M rating. And so I know this probably isn't a title for me. The reason that I want to bring it up, though, is that they changed a couple of things with this one to make it basically between 10 and 14 hours long. So this is a game that you can finish, and maybe there's replay value in it. And that's something that, as a dad, I actually really love. Like, I love playing the Breath of the Wilds where I will hang out in a game for, 40 to 60 hours, and I'll play it for a couple of months, but I can't do one after the other of that. And what I'm really coming to appreciate is these narrative-based games that tell a great story. They're a great experience, and you finish them. And if you really loved them that much after, 10 to 15 hours, you might go back and play it again if it was really that good. But it really respects your time, which is why I also appreciate a new thing that they're starting to do with some of these remakes. I think one of the Dragon Quest games was the one that's most noted for this, is they shortened the campaign. And so you don't have to play for like 100 hours to work your way through this game and level up. They actually changed it so you can experience the entire thing in about 40 hours. And as a guy who usually gets an hour tops at night to play video games, I appreciate a game that's not going to take half a year for me to actually see the end of the story. And because I want to respect your time, that's going to pretty much wrap it up for us on this very first episode of the Game Adventure Podcast. I am so grateful that you stopped by and hung out with me for a little while on a Saturday morning. I hope the rest of your Saturday goes great, whatever you have in store. If you're doing something with the kids, hanging out with the wife, hanging out on your own, playing some video games maybe, I don't know. But I hope you have a fantastic day, and I will see you again next Saturday for another roundup of the latest news and some nerdy gaming related content. If you could do me a quick favor and rate and review this podcast if it was something that resonated with you, that you enjoyed. And hey, tell a couple of friends about it, other people that you think might enjoy hanging out on a Saturday morning or whenever you're listening to this. And in the words of the great LeVar Burton of Reading Rainbow, I'll see you next time.